And welcome to Neverwinter with our gun. So with module 23 we'll be getting a lot of new gear, and specifically gear that tanks can be using to increase their survivability along with aggro retention. So I've been messing around with the build and figuring out what kind of gear we want to be using with this module, replacing stuff we've used in the past with module 22. What new gear will you want to be using to replace this older gear? So I've made a document to showcase all of this gear just here, and you'll be able to download it with a link to the description below. First thing to note is it's still 2 weeks away from module 23 launching, so things are still open to change. And otherwise, many of these things are from my experience and my opinions on these different gear choices. So we'll start things off with our headgear. A new piece we have is the rugged sallet, and it would give us the Manticore's main bite, and this is a very good bonus to hold aggro at the very beginning with a boss fight, due to casting a daily power, and you deal then extra damage to the enemy up to 50% of your maximum hit points, and then this is scaled off your global threat modifier, which means you're essentially getting a good jump ahead of the DPS in terms of effective damage you've dealt to the boss, so that makes sure to look at you instead of your allies. And you can see it's simply going to replace the main of the Manticore, which we got from Avernus Hunts. Same bonus and everything, just different stats, and of course mythic quality, not that it means much. Now other alternative pieces would be the Turban of Shifting Sands and the Chitter's Fangs. The Turban I would use always within AoE fights where you have lots of enemies and you kill them pretty quickly, and otherwise you want to group them up so that DPS can even more efficiently and better kill them off as quickly as possible. Then you move on to the next area. That pulling effect can be really good, and otherwise it will of course give you some deflect severity and reduce their accuracy, giving you a bit of survivability boost. Otherwise there's the Chitter's Fangs. If you need a little bit more aggro and you already have the Manticore's main bite, let's say on a ring, which I'll show later on in the video, then you might want to run this headpiece. It will allow you to deal damage up to 5% of your max HP. Unfortunately there's a cooldown and you have to use an encounter power to trigger it. Again, it's from Avernus Hunts there, and the Turban is from Hardcore Voss. My recommendations would be to run the rugged sallet in single target fights if you're like the main tank and just need that extra aggro at the beginning, and otherwise the Turban of Sands when you're in an AoE environment, or just for a little bit of a survivability boost when you cast that daily power. As for armor, we have like the rugged mail of the Dragon Hunter, which is the new piece coming out, and essentially whenever you take a damage that's more than 50% of your max HP, you'll gain awareness and stamina regen. Not too bad, but it does have a 15-second cooldown and only lasts 10 seconds, which does mean it has an uptime of 66%, but since you can't trigger exactly when you want to, it will be a bit of RNG whether you get hit that hard or not, depending of course what content you're running. You might want something a bit more reliable, like the Forest Guardian's Ward Scale Mail. Now this mythic piece is simply like an upgrade from the Wasteland Mercs leathers. Not exactly, since this gives you reduction to damage taken, damage resistance, and that's not then going to be limited on what stats you have. If you're capped in awareness, this mythic piece will be useless to you, whereas the Wastelands will give you that 3% damage resistance boost, but in my opinion it's only 3% and again far too unreliable, and even has a 30-second cooldown instead of just 15. So much better alternatives in my opinion would be the Forest Guardian's Ward Scale Mail. The problem is it just gives ratings, which can be hard to fit in if you're running, let's say, an augment companion to boost your defensive stats. Many people however would run with a striker instead on a tank. Of course, it would depend on what content you're running, and then you shouldn't have any problem fitting in the ratings. So for me, there's not any need to upgrade to the mythic piece unless you're running an augment companion for, let's say, Master Tiamat. Then there is of course the Weathered Wood Breastplate, giving the 5000 defense instead of like awareness, but not the best with stat efficiency because only 5000 versus 7500. And again, you can see the location that they come from. Now we move to our arms, and we have these rugged gauntlets. They have the Defender's Guard. Whenever you're struck, you gain damage stacks up to 5, and whenever you strike your enemy, you consume those stacks and they turn into damage resistance. So what you can do then is just let the enemy hit you 5 times when you jump into a pack of mobs, or even when you're fighting a boss, and then once that happens, you can then attack them, and that triggers and gives you the 5% total damage resistance. It's great, but doesn't fit in with the meta with regards to to the beginning of the fight because you'll want to make sure you have the aggro, so you'll be hitting as much as you can there. But later on in the fight, you can generally time it out so that you can always have this 5% extra damage resistance up all the time. There are the Midnight Grips from Hardcore Voss, the very similar bonus. Whenever you strike an enemy, you gain stacks, and whenever you're struck, you gain the damage resistance. Can be a little bit easier because it doesn't count as you being struck unless you actually lose hit points. So if you're just blocking with your shield, then you won't be able to, let's say, trigger these rugged gauntlets. You won't be able to gain those stacks. You would have to actually lose hit points to gain those stacks. With the Midnight Grips, you can just block all the time while you strike the enemy. And then, of course, other alternatives are like the Superior Crushers. When you have no teammates within 30 feet, you gain 5% power and defense. That's a pretty reliable bonus to defense. And the way it actually works is you just need at least one party member further away than 30 feet. Not sure why it works like that, but 30 feet's a pretty small distance, and then thus this is a pretty reliable 5% bonus. And healers would run with these as well and just try and stay 30 feet away, and thus if you have that, then you would gain the bonus from this as well. Otherwise, there's the Tactical Gloves of the Dragon Hunter. It does give you recharge speed, and don't underestimate it. Reducing the cooldowns of your encounter powers can definitely be very useful, as encounter powers on a tank are pretty impactful. Regenerating your shield, allowing you to deal more damage for aggro, or just giving you a lot more survivability by reducing the damage you take. So let's move on to our feat, and here we have either the Rugged Sabatons or the Blessed Wisps of the Shadow Demon. And the Shadow Demon Wisps have essentially just been upgraded to this new mythic piece. This comes from your Avernus Hunts, and this is going to come from Dragon Hunts. Essentially, exact same bonus there, ghosted. The way it works is whenever you're critically hit, which is quite regularly, it's 50% chance whenever enemies hit you, and up to 90% chance when the healer heals you. That does count as being critically struck. And then you would gain, on 10% chance, 20% maximum hit points. That's a huge survivability boost, plus 3% extra defense. Lasts 10 seconds and then has no cooldown, so you can trigger it pretty much immediately again. It's just an upgrade from these wisps. Then we go down and you have some more feat options. You could be using the Slips of Rain instead. For example, these boots give you a big boost in maximum hit points, but in some areas, like Crown of Keldagon, this can be a negative when the damage you take is just a percentage of your maximum hit points. So the more hit points you have, the more damage you take. And in my opinion, it's a bit of a ridiculous system, but they can do that to prevent, let's say, power creep with regards to survivability, at least on the hit point side of things. So you might want something else that doesn't give you hit points, and then you would want like the Slips of Rain, giving you up to 10% critical avoidance. It's the same activation bonus, and then it's the same with the Rusted Sabatons of the Dragon Hunter. These are some purple gear, again from Dragon Hunts, and you would gain 7.5% deflect severity depending on what build you're going for. And then you could of course use Boots of the Herald for 5% defense when in full party, and then you would give everybody else 1% defense. You could of course use the Crimson Scalebreaker Restoration Pickaxes. They would essentially just give you the ability to gain 1% movement speed and recharge speed up to 5% of each whenever you deflect an attack. And with a deflect orientated build, that'd be very easy to maintain. And again, that recharge speed can be used to reduce the cooldowns of your powers, so it can be pretty useful. We go to rings, and there's quite a lot of options here for the tank, so bear with me. New rings, we have this one here, the Stalwart Needle of Celerity, and essentially gives you the benefit of Charging Bull, which is just an upgrade from the Ring of Condemned Charging Bull. Essentially gives you the ability to generate threat around you as you're moving, and this can be very good when you're going against multiple enemies to make sure you keep their attention and grab their attention also at the beginning without having to cast, let's say, some encounter power or trying to hit them with some AoE power. You would get this from Dragon Hunts, and the older one you would get from Avernus. It's highly unlikely these effects will stack with one another. Potentially they might, and I will do my best to go and test that. Otherwise, you may very well likely not even be able to equip both of them at the same time. Then you do have a ring which is a situational optional one, just 10% less damage from dragons. You can use that in Dragon Hunts, and you can use that in like Tiamat or even Crown of Keldgon now. And then there's also the Ring of Overwhelmed, which also comes from Mog and Garrix, and this would definitely be a very good ring to run in combination with either the Ring of Condemned or the Ring of Celerity, since you're running anyway, and this just gives you that 10% extra increased damage resistance. Otherwise, we have some more rings here from Vault of Stars. You have the Living Fern ring with the Manticore's main bite. You do have alternative rings you can get from Tara the Mad Mage, which also have Manticore's bite. I believe they're the Tanner rings. You have like Grove's Gentle Breeze, giving you damage resistance when you cast a daily power. Usually if you're going to take a big hit, you'll use a daily power, and this would give you that extra, even more survivability boost on top of the daily power you're using. And then Fallen Lord's Tact, not really reliable. You just use it for the critical avoidance stat boost there. And the same with the Queen's Silver Crowned ring. It does have the benefit to give you awareness ratings, good in AoE fights when you get hit a lot, but in most boss fights they don't hit you all too often. Unless you're in Crown of Keldgon, you can get this triggered like all the time, which can be very good. But again, keep in mind, if you're running an augment build or something with extra awareness, you might not be able to fit all that awareness stacks in. Then alternatively, you could use the Ring of Darkness and the Band of Air, the two rings hardest to obtain in the entire game. You could just run the Ring of Darkness. It will reduce enemies' accuracy. Again, it's only a 10% chance to proc it, and by reducing the enemy's accuracy by 30% since I last tested, it's the equivalent of adding 30% deflect severity yourself, which can go over the cap of 90%. And then if you slot the Band of Air to go with that, you could then obtain a bit more aggro. You could of course use the Band of Air by itself. That does more damage than having a set, but if you have it as a set, you gain a 5% extra chance to proc both the Band of Air and the Ring of Darkness, and you would definitely want to run with the Mythalar set to also help proc those rings to go with it. Again, those are from Hardcore Voss. Now we move down to our Neck, Waist and Artifact set, and we do have a new set upcoming, which is the Tiamat's Golden Necklace, or this Draconic Resilience. You get the Sash and Artifact Globe to go with that, and essentially you're reducing the damage you take and also increasing your critical avoidance, but only for 10 seconds and only when your stamina drops below 15%. Overall, it's a pretty neat set, but not, in my opinion, what I would consider the best. The new Dragon Scale set, this one right here, giving Vanguard's Alacrity, in my opinion, is the best. You can animation cancel powers to gain all 3 stacks and maintain them. And that's a total of 7.5% awareness and 15% deflect severity. That's a pretty massive survivability boost. It is about 2 or 3% more than the Tiamat set when you have that active. Just keep in mind the Tiamat set can only be active about 50% of the time because it has a 20-second cooldown and only lasts for 10 seconds. Then you have like the Diamond set with Dash and Decoy. When you stand still for 3 seconds, you gain 5% awareness and reduce the damage you take by 5%. It's very good for when you're about to take a big hit. You would then have that extra boost. And if you can't animation cancel for this new set or don't have it, because it's not as easy to obtain through Dragon Hunts, then you might want to go with this set instead, as it comes from Diamond Shards or just cheaply from the auction house. And that would be a very good set for newer players who want that extra survivability against boss fights. Otherwise, there is the Mythalar set from Dragonbone Vale. I need to adjust this. Whoops, I never edited it. It comes from the Dragonbone Vale campaign and essentially just allows you to deal an additional hit. And it's very good for sustained threat generation. I will go over in an upcoming video the difference between the different aggro sets and why Mythalar can actually go out on top. And you would run this as well to also help proc like the Band of Air or the Ring of Darkness if you're running with those. Lastly, we have our shirt and trousers. And we do have a new set, which is the Rugged Dwarven Body Pattern. Essentially gives you this Dwarven Resilience. Gives you 1,500 power, crit severity, and awareness. It's mainly the awareness we're looking at for that extra survivability. And essentially you have 6 different options of the shirts and pants. And you can get a shirt that gives you defensive stats of defense and awareness. And you have pants then with a bunch of those defensive stats of control resistance, deflect severity, and critical avoidance, and also deflection. And again, they're from Dragon Hunts. Alternatively, you could use your Greater Everfrost set there. Whenever you perform a deflection, you essentially return 50% of the incoming damage back to the attacker. However, the damage cannot exceed 15% of your max HP. Unfortunately, it doesn't add up to a lot of damage, but it will help a little bit for extra threat generation if you want to sacrifice the item level you see it's pretty massive there, and that would reduce your survivability by a bit, but help with aggro. And otherwise, there is the ebony stained ward trousers, good for survivability. However, you can't really maintain the bonus for very long, so you'll only really use it for when you're about to take a big hit, and then you'll be able to have time to recover again. If you're taking sustained damage over time, then this gear piece, I just throw it out the window. Take higher item level stuff like this new set, and you'll be much better off. Overall, that's my entire document for tanks and my walkthrough of each of the pieces and my choices for taking them. There's definitely a lot of gear pieces we will be upgrading for Module 23. You can of course just run with your usual stuff. You will be able to do pretty much all content without any of this new stuff. I've completed Master Tiamat without any of the new stuff, and it's perfectly doable. It's just you will be able to gain an edge in endgame on survivability by raising your item level, and then there are of course a few pieces which do have a bit more stats than you would have with the older pieces. And so finally, I'd like to give a massive thank you to all of my channel members for helping me keep my channel going. And if it was as well, consider leaving the video a like, and if you're new around here, consider subscribing. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.